Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us at a monumental time in the history of the American people and the Jewish people. This is a historic discussion. Historic not only because it brings together two of the foremost personalities in our nation and indeed the world, but because the privilege of hearing Nobel Peace Laureate Elie Wiesel on any occasion is itself historic. My friends, Elie Wiesel is the living face of the 6 million murdered victims of the Holocaust. He is a living conscience of mankind. One of the most respected human beings alive, he brings a moral authority on issues that he addresses that is utterly unmatched. I am personally grateful for the 25 years of friendship and mentorship that he has given me, amidst my many flaws and foibles, Rabbi Eliezer, and for always rising to the occasion when the Jewish people find themselves in danger. Professor Elie Wiesel is a prince of the Jewish people. And he is a crown jewel of the American people as well. I should mention that the choice of doing this discussion on the nuclear threat from Iran and how never again must indeed mean never again is not first connected with the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel will speak in Congress tomorrow, for which Professor Wiesel has come with his wife Marion to be part of that address. For me, it is first and foremost connected with the fact that today is probably the 70th anniversary of the murder of Anne Frank. We do not know exactly because she died in the first week of March of 1945, murdered at Bergen-Belsen. And I just came back from Amsterdam where I interviewed her very best friend, Jacqueline von Marsen, who is mentioned many times in her diary. To have the living face of the 6 million talk to us about the need for genocide to be taken seriously by the nations of the world, and especially for those nations who've already experienced the horrors of extermination and annihilation, for those nations to have a voice that is heard, for those nations to stand up proudly to say that their lives are no better than any other, but are no worse than any other either. That, my friends, is the purpose of this occasion. And I truly want to thank Professor Wiesel, who came straight from the airport. And his age is no secret because he's only slightly older than the number of books that he has published. At a mature age, traveling becomes more challenging. And Marion, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of the Jewish community. On behalf of all of the people who are gathered here, and on behalf of 7 million citizens of the State of Israel, 6 million Jews and 1 million Arab citizens, Muslim citizens of the State of Israel, I want to thank you and Elie for coming to speak out for the Jewish state in this very challenging time. And joining Professor Wiesel is a man who we asked to be part of this discussion, not because he is a senator first and foremost, although that helps because we wouldn't have the room otherwise. And we'd all be meeting in an RV outside or in the local Starbucks. Joining him on this podium for this, on this panel for this discussion is a man that we have asked to participate because he is a lion in the defense of Israel and the Jewish people. I say Israel and the Jewish people because he has spoken out so many times against the threat of anti-Semitism and not just the threats against the Jewish state. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is a man who has studied in Princeton and in Harvard Law School. We forgive him for that. It's just a little joke. I went to Chabad Yeshiva. It's just as prestigious. Perhaps more. And Senator Cruz, we are so grateful. You are not Jewish, and yet you have adopted our nation as your own. And you have... And you have come to Israel's defense on countless occasions, even when you had to pay a political price for it. And God bless you, and thank you. Finally, my friends, just before we begin this discussion on the nuclear threat from Iran and how never again must never be again, I personally want to offer an apology to anyone who was offended by our organization's ad about the National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, including Ms. Rice herself. This event is organized by the Israel Values Network. We believe in Jewish values. And our disagreement with Ms. Rice is strictly over policy. And if it was construed by some as a personal attack, that was certainly and absolutely not its intent. I now want to turn to the living voice of our 6 million lost victims as we contemplate annihilatory threats against the Jewish people. And ladies and gentlemen, I call Elie Wiesel at Rabbi Eliezer. I hope you will understand. I will call him that throughout this discussion. It's an endearing term. Rabbi Eliezer, first of all, thank you very much for coming. How concerned are you about the rise of anti-Semitism around the world?
I'm a Jew who is always concerned. To be Jewish in this world means to be concerned. There are always reasons, because we have enough enemies in the world, too many. I must confess that years and years and years ago, I had hoped that after 45, anti-Semitism will be extinguished. No more anti-Semitism. At least one lesson, I thought, will be learned. Because we knew that, of course, anti-Semitism was not the only cause that produced, so to speak, what we so poorly call the Shoah or the Holocaust. But surely, without it, there would have been no Shoah. And therefore, we thought anti-Semitism, therefore, is so disqualified, so discarded, that no one would ever be an anti-Semite afterwards. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, I had to go to this conference and that conference and this gathering fighting anti-Semitism. Why? What is it about anti-Semitism that survived its victims? I don't know. What is the appeal in anti-Semitism? Believe me, after all, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, I try to understand it. I read all the books about it, there are hundreds of them. And I have not found an answer. Oh, some of them say it's always whatever the answer, it's always actually economic. They are jealous of our money. But what about the poor? Why do they hate poor Jews? And what about those who say we are too famous? And what about those Jews who are not famous? Hatred of Jews is so special that it has more than one answer, more than one component. We don't know why, but it's there. Literally, since the Jewish people exists, it was accompanied by its enemies. So as long as we are immortal and eternal, apparently, anti-Semites are also, in their way, immortal and unfortunately sometimes powerful. What can one do, therefore, against anti-Semitism? We have tried everything, naturally, but I believe really that whatever the answer is, education must be a cardinal element of that answer. It must begin with education.
So, Rabbi Eliezer, if we want to educate the world about anti-Semitism and this constant threat of hatred of the Jews that can lead to annihilation. What about when the threat is much more urgent? There's a lot of talk now about the Iranian nuclear threat. You took out full-page ads. There's one in today's Washington Post, but beyond that, you started in October 2013 where you said Iran should not be allowed to remain nuclear. Are you concerned in particular about the Iranian nuclear threat?
Again, I'm concerned because I learned to rely not only on the promises of our friends, but on the threats of our enemies. Which means if the enemies make threats, take them seriously. And when I read, therefore, that there are anti-Semites today who are vocal, who dare to be vocal. There were years in the beginning after the war when it was not nice to be anti-Semitic. It was not fashionable. So they hid it. But now it's already part of it. It's part of modern life to be anti-Semitic. They don't mind being called anti-Semites. They call it anti-Israeli, but also anti-Semites. We must go back to the importance of words. And we must say, look, an anti-Semite is an anti-Semite. And who is an anti-Semite? Somebody, actually, who denies the Jewish people its right to live as a Jewish people. Not only as a people, as a Jewish people. And we know that sometimes it of course, in Nazi Germany, in Hitler's Germany, what they did. But today, there are no such dangers. I don't think that the Jewish people today is physically threatened. Israel is threatened by its enemies, those of them who have power and the will. But nevertheless, I don't think that Jews today, even in one place or another, live in danger, under real threats. If yes, I should know, because I can tell you that both my wife and I are involved so much with Jewish life that whenever something happens to a Jewish community anywhere, 24 hours later we know about it, and sometimes I try to take a plane and go there, wherever it is. To be there.
To speak out against.
To be there. To be there, first of all, to say, I am there, I'm a witness, I'm there. If Jews are threatened, I want to be there. If Jews suffer, I want to be there. Same time, if Jews are happy, Israel, I go to there. I used to go to Russia. Before it was possible, I went there. When it wasn't so safe to go to Russia. I went there on Simchat Torah, of all places, thanks, to be there on Simchat Torah, to dance with Torah in the streets of Moscow in '65. But we did it. Look.
But Rabbi Eliezer, if words really matter, and you're
saying...
They
do, of course they do.
And you're saying that you've learned to take the threats of our enemies as seriously as the promises of our friends. If Iran is making threats about the annihilation of Israel, even if they don't have the capability today, the question is whether they'll have the capability tomorrow. Must those threats of the destruction of the state of Israel and the annihilation of this eerie number of 6 million Jews who currently live in Israel, must that be taken seriously?
I believe absolutely yes. If they say so, and they repeatedly say so, we must take it seriously. Even if we know today they are incapable of doing that. But we should take them seriously. And therefore act upon our leaders also to take them seriously. Which means whenever the White House or here or the Quai d'Orsay in Paris, they deal with those people, they should know, look, what you have said about the Jewish people and about Israel.
Okay. So what I've taken from what you've said so far, Rabbi Eliezer, is that thank God the Jewish people are far better off today than we were in the time when you were a 16-year-old boy in Auschwitz, of course. We have a voice, we have a state, we have a country that can defend itself, but there are annihilatory threats against us that must be taken very seriously, and Iran is making those annihilatory threats.
We also have America, really.
To defend us.
To defend us, really. We have America today. In my time, we didn't have America. After all, the Americans could have helped us much more. Whenever I would come to the White House, I used to come at times, I would ask the president, whoever it was, I asked 5 presidents a question. In 1944, what were you doing? Did you have good breakfast? What did you do? You knew it already, because we in Hungary learned about it only in 1944 in April. April 1944. The entire world already knew about Auschwitz. We'd never heard the name Auschwitz. And Auschwitz from Siget, my town, was maybe 100 kilometers away. We never heard about it. 1944, April. Why weren't we warned? Had the radio, we listened to the radio London, if we had the radio about the Jews of Hungary, don't go to the railway station. Just like that, don't go to the railway station. Well, maybe 50% would not go. Maybe 20% would not go. My town was surrounded by mountains. We could have gone to the mountains. There were some Christian families that would have taken us in. They were good Christians, good people. We never heard the name Auschwitz and Siget until we came there. How was it possible in 1944? And when I ask these questions, nobody has the answer.
And so much more could have been done.
There's no doubt. Look again, my little town Siget was surrounded by mountains. The Russians were 30 kilometers away. 30 kilometers away. You could have walked to the frontier.
If the people knew, if they just...
If they had known. In 1944, when you opened the New York Times, opened the New York Herald Tribune, it was in the paper since 1942, except we didn't know.
Which would underscore the need for us to speak out now and not be silent.
Surely one of the reasons is that whenever threat is there, whenever injustice is committed, we cannot be silent. Silence is not the answer. Silence is never an option.
Senator Cruz, Professor Wiesel made an excellent point that not only can the Jewish people find security, we are threatened in so many parts of the world. I just came back from Brussels a few nights ago. The Jewish day schools there look like army camps, soldiers outside, barricades everywhere, schools. Jews killed in Paris, Jews killed in Brussels, Jews killed in Copenhagen, Jews killed in Paris. We are threatened in many parts of the world, and Professor Wiesel is making the point that there is an IDF, an Israeli army, that can defend the Jewish people, but also there's 6 million Jews who live here in the United States, and thank God for America, the greatest country in the world. We're very grateful for everything America does for all of its citizens. But what about Professor Wiesel's point that this great country, which fought and defeated Hitler, still did not take action to stop the death camps at Auschwitz, a very controversial historical point. Is that why it's important for the Prime Minister of Israel to come and give a speech to sound the alarm so that we don't suffer in silence?
Absolutely. Let me say at the outset, Shmuley, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for moderating this, and thank you for your clear, principled leadership.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you.
And I want to say to have the opportunity to participate in this discussion with Elie Wiesel, and you are truly an American hero, a Jewish hero, and a hero of the world. And it is humbling and breathtaking to have the opportunity to participate in shining the light and speaking to the grave threats facing today both the nation of Israel and America. And thank you for being here. Thank you for your incredible leadership. And Marion, thank you for your powerful voice and friendship as well. It is really an honor to be with you. Look, your question in 1944, of course we should have acted. There's no, that is not a difficult question. It is unambiguously, it is a moral outrage and a grievous sin that we did not act sooner. And that underscores the need to act now. At the end of the day, you know, this is an interesting time in Washington. There's lots of chatter about politics. There's lots of chatter about someone at the White House is offended that some protocol wasn't followed and that this or that or the other, and none of it matters. It is all nonsense. What matters is what we do right now to address the single greatest national security threat facing both the nation of Israel and the United States. What we do right now to ensure that in no circumstances will the nation of Iran be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons capability. The gravity of this threat cannot be overstated. With respect to the nation of Israel, I agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu that a nuclear Iran presents an existential threat to Israel. And I would note that existential doesn't mean a Frenchman in a black beret chain-smoking. It means quite literally going to the very existence of the nation of Israel. We're here today talking about never again and never forget. There is one threat on the face of the planet right now that poses a meaningful possibility of once again exterminating 6 million Jews. And that is a nuclear Iran. A nuclear Iran that used those nuclear weapons to annihilate Israel could carry out the very same grotesque evil we saw 70 years ago. And we should understand the nature of Khomeini and the radical mullahs. You know, the reason I am here more than anything else is I believe in good and evil. When you lock people in cages and you light them on fire, that is evil. When you go into a synagogue with meat cleavers and hack people apart as they are praying to God, that is evil. When you crucify children, when you use rape as a weapon of war, that is evil. And Khomeini and the mullahs have not been subtle in any regard about what their objectives are in the nuclear program. This is not about powering the lights. The father of the Iranian nuclear program, who thankfully has now met his maker. Involuntarily, I might add. In his last will and testament, he explicitly provided what he wanted on his tombstone. He specified that his tombstone would read, "Here lies a man who sought to annihilate the nation of Israel." Those are his words written in his last will and testament. If you want to understand what we're facing, that is what we are talking about. And for those who say, well, that may be Israel's concern, but what does that impact America? It is not by accident that Iran refers to Israel as the little Satan and America as the great Satan, which I would note, great Satan is not a compliment. Just last year, Khomeini gave a public speech in Tehran where he stood up and said, the greatest human rights abuser on the face of the globe is the United States of America. The response of the crowd was chanting in unison, "Death to America." That was last year. In the midst of these negotiations. Every year, Iran has a holiday. Look, we're familiar with holidays here in the United States. We're familiar with Thanksgiving, Christmas, the 4th of July. In Iran, they have a holiday they celebrate every year. It's called Death to America Day. It is the anniversary of Iran taking Americans hostage, and they celebrate it every year. Just over a year ago, Iran named as their United Nations ambassador one of the terrorists who participated in holding Americans hostage, Hamid Abu-Dhabi. Some say this is ancient history. No, no, no. These are reasonable people. Well, you know, Rouhani tweets. I don't really care that he tweets. And ISIS tweets too. We need to understand what it is we're doing. The ICBM program that Iran is continuing to build right now. As we sit here today, Iran is building centrifuges. Iran is enriching uranium. Iran is continuing to develop its ICBM program. And for 3 years, we've gone round and round in pointless negotiations while we endanger both our security and Israel's security. An ICBM is not needed to attack Israel. As we all know, the IC stands for intercontinental, as in getting to another continent. And let's be very clear, the ICBM program exists for one purpose only, and that is to send a nuclear weapon to the United States of America.
So I take it, Senator, you are not a great fan of the Iranian government. I do hope you read my Twitter feed. I read yours. Very strong words, very powerful words. Rabbi Eliezer, following on from what Senator Cruz said, so there's negotiations with Iran, and no one really doubts that the United States, of course, wants to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The question is, do we trust them? If we negotiate with them and they give us their word, since Senator Cruz framed this in this paragon of good and evil, and since you are one of the foremost moral authorities in the world, do we trust a government that hangs gays in public squares, that stones women to death, that shoots its own citizens when they protest their government, as they did in the Green Revolution of 2009? Do we trust them? That's the key question. Can we trust these negotiations? How do you feel about trusting the Iranian government?
Trust is a very personal attitude. You cannot say a government can trust. Only a person can trust, really. And I wouldn't trust, actually, unless proven that I'm wrong, which means I need proof that whatever I read about Iran is not so. I need proof that Iran changed its policy. I need proof that Iran is not Iran anymore the way it is now, but it's different. It's learned something. Iran, we had problems with Iran. I organized a conference, organized a conference in Paris 5 or 6 or 7 years ago when the whole thing began about Iran. And I brought together 200 Nobel Prize winners from all over the world, mainly from Europe, only about that, about Iran. We felt then, already then in Paris, I remember, that Iran is a danger, it's a threat. And we came out after 2 days of deliberations with of course,
all the way back then?
Yes, a resolution. Nobody read it, but at least we worked on it, we worked. Governments read it. It had an impact for a while. Today again. Unless we learn something from history, what are we doing here? And we learned that when evil begins its work, don't give it another chance.
When evil begins its work, don't give it another chance. Senator Cruz, care to comment? You know, Professor Wiesel, as you know, speaks in aphorisms.
Wisdom is not complicated. It simply speaks the truth. What is needed more than anything right now is that we speak the truth. Not that we engage in Orwellian doublespeak. Not that we refuse to call evil by its name. Not that we refuse to acknowledge radical Islamic terrorism. Not that we fail to acknowledge Coptic Christians who were murdered for their faith. We speak the truth. And I will tell you tomorrow, as we all know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to give an historic speech to Congress. I had the opportunity earlier today to visit briefly with the Prime Minister, and the message I conveyed to him was simple. I said, your remarks tomorrow are important to Israel, but they're every bit as important to the United States of America. And I have to say, the clarity and the strength that has been demonstrated by Prime Minister Netanyahu, no matter what attack, no matter what criticism, he is a man who is speaking up with clarion acuity as to the mortal threat a nuclear Iran presents. And there is a reason that the adjective most frequently being applied to the Prime Minister today is Churchillian. If we go forward with a deal that allows Iran to acquire nuclear weapons capability, I believe that history may well record it as a mistake and a catastrophe on the order of magnitude of Munich. And when our negotiators return with a promise of peace in our time, we should believe it no more now than we should have believed it then. On the face of it, the deal we say we're trying to reach would leave Iran within 1 year of nuclear breakout. Now, that assumes perfect monitoring, that we know where they are. It assumes that we would immediately know when they begin moving towards breakout. And it assumes that we could move to action within that year. Beyond that, the deal, as contemplated, allows Iran to maintain centrifuges in perpetuity, to maintain enriched uranium in perpetuity, to continue developing its ICBM program with no restrictions whatsoever, and includes within it a sunset, that at the end of a set period of years, 3 years or 5 years or what have you, everything goes away and we are all fine and dandy with Iran with a nuclear weapon. There's a technical word for that. Lunacy. Getting that deal would be terrible. Under no circumstances should radical religious zealots who embrace death, who embrace suicide, who say it is their objective to annihilate Israel and annihilate America, under no circumstances should we allow these theocratic radicals to possess the ultimate weapon of destruction. And I will say it is my hope that in his remarks tomorrow, that Prime Minister Netanyahu's words will resonate with members of Congress and with the American people. This should be a matter of bipartisan agreement.
So, there were press reports a few months back, not even very long ago, that the people of Israel wanted you to be their president. You're already the prince of our people, but it would have given you a more formal title. That's the esteem with which the Israeli people hold you and the Jewish people worldwide. But you've now come here to hear the Prime Minister. You've come to Washington, D.C. Do you think it's important that the Prime Minister speak? There's been a lot of controversy about the speech. A lot of people are saying it's fraying ties. Is it important for the Prime Minister to speak? Is it important for you to be here when he speaks?
It's important for him to speak. It's important for the American people to listen to him. Whoever the Prime Minister is, by the way. Prime Minister of Israel, democratically elected by the Israeli people, deserves to be heard in America, the largest democracy in the world. Absolutely. Where else should he go except here, really? But when the Prime Minister of Israel speaks, it's not a political event alone. It must be viewed, measured in historic terms. We are so used now to have a government, the Israeli army. Hey, remember, for 2,000 years we had none. And those 2,000 years were not happy years, except a few years during the Golden Age. But otherwise, it was terrible. After 2,000 years, we have an army, an Israeli army. But for the first time, I came to visit Israel in 1949. I was in Paris. Lived in Paris. I came there for a few months. Whenever I would see the Israeli uniform, I would stop, breathless. I use other uniforms, but I used to see other uniforms in Europe. Not an Israeli uniform with a Magen David and weapons, revolver. And I had palpitations just watching an Israeli uniform. Now the Israeli army is the marvel of the world. I gave a lecture at West Point years and years ago. I took my wife with me because I thought, what could I tell the West Point people? Really, I have given so many lectures in my life. What can I say in West Point? To speak about the Bible from the military viewpoint or something. After all, Joshua, the best thing would be on Joshua, the greatest commander in biblical history. I spoke about the beauty of language. What is our history, really, if not the beauty of language? And therefore, when you speak, Senator, it has that reverberation because there is something, the background behind it. I'm an American too. I came to America as a stateless person. The first time I had a passport in my life was an American passport. And I didn't go anywhere. I didn't have the money to go anywhere. But I carried my passport in my pocket for the first time. And look, I'm very proud of that. What does it really mean to us to have also the land of Israel? I can tell you something which may shock you. I think the Jewish people would have survived today had there been no Israel in 1948. It was like that. You know, the vote there was so short. When you think about it, it was scandalous the way the independence of Israel was declared. The few votes, both, sometimes with influence, other times with money, but we had to record that. You would have thought that the entire world would vote for a Jewish independent state. But they owed us something. It's true, it played a role, but they owed us. But they also got money. You would think, therefore, that now we have learned, and the world has learned. But whenever Israel is in danger, Israel is alone, except for the Jewish people and our friends in the non-Jewish world. What we call now Chasidei Umot HaOlam, the righteous Gentiles, which is a new phenomenon. We had very few in those years. But now, there are. There are Christians, and Christian believers and non-believers, even some Muslims. And they are good human beings. And therefore, they are friends of Israel. Thank God for them.
But we can't categorize Senator Cruz as a Hasid Umot Ha'olam, as one of the righteous Gentiles, because he's an honorary Jew. So it's a different category. It's somewhere in the middle. Senator Cruz, actually, just before, I must follow on from that. Professor Wiesel, but amidst saying that, and that's so true, the righteous Gentiles, countries like the United States that are phenomenal friends of Israel, the United States Congress that will listen to the Israeli Prime Minister tomorrow. I was at his last speech, the Prime Minister, where he got 29 standing ovations. It was an amazing thing to see. An Israeli Prime Minister welcomed so warmly by the most powerful legislature in the entire world. It made me proud as an American, of course proud as a Jew. But as you look at the landscape of the world today, knowing that it's 70 years since you were liberated, right now, these months, 70 years, the anniversary of your liberation as an inmate in a death camp where your father died, where your sister died. We have Betsy Pora named after her in Israel till today. And you see this resurgence, something we never expected, so much Jew hatred, that Iran, a member state of the United Nations, can openly call for the annihilation of a fellow UN member state, and it barely makes news. It's like Iran threatens Israel's existence, it's Thursday. It barely makes news. Or to see Jews shot and killed. Did you ever think that we would be coming back to this?
No, I had already the question before. No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. I told you, I was convinced after the war that anti-Semitism will be gone. That at least one lesson, no anti-Semitism, will be learned from what happened. At least one. Then, of course, we could learn other things, that anti-Semitism was not a unique or uniquely Jewish tragedy. It was a world tragedy. Because of anti-Semitism, actually, it almost legitimized the hatred of the minorities and the others and the otherness of the other, which was all of a sudden dismissed as negligible, or condemnable, or rejectable. Yes, there were times, I must tell you, I was very optimistic in the 40s, late 40s. I thought the world has learned. And then I learned that the world has not learned. Does it mean that the world is capable of doing today what it did then? I hope not.
But must we be vigilant to make sure that it doesn't happen? That never again must mean never again?
Look, we must be vigilant simply because we are who we are. The moment we start forgetting itself has a process. It's not a one-time forgetting. If you forget one thing, you'll forget the next thing. If you forget tomorrow, you'll forget after tomorrow. If you choose forgetting as a way of life, then what life is it? What life could it be? We, especially our generation, live in the memory. We believe in remembering. It's painful. It's not easy. It's painful. So what? So what? How could I live without it, or in a different way? Of course we remember, all the time, every day, and sometimes more than one. And yet, my favorite expression is and yet. Normally, I belong to a group or to a generation that could say, come on, leave me alone. I have given enough. Now I want to live. I want to go and eat caviar and go whatever. I don't know. I don't like it. But I go and do whatever. Go to the movies, go to the theater. Enjoy life. Come on, you have enough. You have given enough. You paid the price. Enough. And nobody, if I had chosen that way, no one would have the right to criticize me. I have paid the price. But I and my generation, I'm not the only one really, chose differently. We decided it would be unworthy to do that. So we chose, on the contrary, I became a teacher, a writer. I try to do something with my life, with my words, with my memories, to do something. Not for myself, it's too late for myself. It's for you, young people, my students, And therefore, I remain the teacher to this day. I remember my teachers to this day. I thank them every single day in my prayers, naturally. I cannot tell you what I feel when I am in a classroom, to be with my students. And therefore you mentioned Netanyahu. Netanyahu, believe it or not, was my student at Boston University. He would come to my classes in Boston. I don't know what he learned, but he came. Ask him tomorrow when he comes and tell me.
You're going to have to grade his speech tomorrow, since you came all the way to hear the speech.
I'm giving him an A right now.
Just before I turn to Senator Cruz, not only is Rebbe Eliezer correct that he still pays the price, I have to say that there's another apology I have to offer today, and that's that I never leave him or Marion alone, and that I feel that we in the Jewish community, the world Jewish community, let alone the community of humanity itself, are so privileged to have Elie Wiesel, that if I can somehow persuade him to share of his wisdom and his gifts with us, Marion, I become a nudge. But to have Elie Wiesel healthy and living till 120 at the very least among us is such a blessing for the Jewish people. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. When Oprah just recently announced that she's re-airing her trip to Auschwitz with Elie and her phenomenal respect, and she has met every great savant, every great wise person in the world, but she always gravitates back to Elie Wiesel. When you first met Professor Wiesel, I took you to his home, Senator Cruz. You're very articulate. You're not at a loss for words. You're a champion debater, and yet I saw you sit on his couch and you were very silent. You were kind of dumbstruck. You didn't know what to say. And I kind of felt for you when I broke the silence. Why? What was it like meeting Elie Wiesel for the first time?
Breathtaking and powerful. Number one, Marion and Elie welcoming me into your home. But moral courage is awe-inspiring. In my own family, my father was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. Nothing remotely comparing to what you went through, but it nonetheless had a profound impact on my family. And to go from the heart of darkness to speak truth and light to the world is powerful. And it's what is needed right now. You know, as we look at what's happening, you know, one of the things you said, Shmuley, a little earlier, you said everyone agrees nobody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And I actually don't think that's right. I believe people intend the natural and foreseeable consequences of their actions. The only natural and foreseeable consequence of this deal being negotiated right now with Iran is that Iran will have nuclear weapons. And I would note, you know, many of the people here remember a few months ago the Jeffrey Goldberg article in which an unnamed White House advisor rather famously used a profane epithet for poultry manure to refer to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And yet, as dismaying as that was not the most troubling part of the article. That was probably the least troubling part of that article. The most troubling part of that article was another quote attributed to that same senior White House advisor, who said the very best thing about what we have done is we have delayed Israel from acting for so long that they are no longer able to act to prevent Iran, quote, from acquiring a nuclear weapons arsenal. That was a quote attributed to a senior White House advisor. I believe those who are leading this negotiation fundamentally don't understand who it is they're negotiating with. I believe... I think their view is it is perfectly acceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons, and they will be part of the rational community of nations, and they do not understand when you are dealing with radical theocratic religious zealotry that ordinary cost-benefit analysis does not work. And let me make a final point in the name of speaking the truth as well. Listen, all of us who love and value the friendship between America and Israel have many, many times said this should be a bipartisan commitment. This should unify us all. And yet there is a simple reality right now, which is that in Congress, the number of congressional Democrats willing to stand up to this administration on Iran is vanishingly small. For this gathering today to be here with a Nobel laureate and world hero like Elie Wiesel, we invited over a dozen Democrats. There's not a congressional Democrat sitting here being part of this discussion, and that was not for lack of invitation. It was because the answer was no.
No. We're not here to boo anyone.
But I will say what my prayer tomorrow is, and what I would urge the people here, as you are visiting with congressional Democrats, my prayer is that Prime Minister Netanyahu's words will be heard by congressional Democrats in both parties. Now listen, I understand standing with your party, and it's fine if someone wants to be a Democrat and be for confiscatory taxes or against the Keystone Pipeline, or we can have all sorts of arguments about all sorts of policy matters and disagree, and we will. But when it comes to protecting our vital national security interests, listen, let's talk specifically. Let's talk the Kirk-Menendez bill. Kirk-Menendez in this current Senate. I'm an original co-sponsor, but it is, to be honest, pretty weak sauce. It lays out circumstances in the future when sanctions would be put in place if the negotiations don't go forward. I can tell you there's been an ongoing effort, this Congress, to weaken Kirk-Menendez, to try to get Democrats to come on board, and it's been weakened to the point that at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure it just says we'll send a really stern letter if Iran gets a bunch of nukes.
So we have 10 Democrats who are prepared to support Kirk-Menendez, and Professor Wiesel took out an ad in the New York Times in October 2013 that was encouraging senators from both parties to increase sanctions against Iran should there be no deal, or even just increase them in order so that there would be a deal, and certainly not unfreeze assets that could be used to create international mayhem, especially in the form of global terrorism. So, but because I promised that we're going to try to keep this short, Professor Wiesel just got off a plane. We're going to ask a final question, and then we're going to look at some of them over there, but we're going to keep this very short. And let me also just say, there are, of course, countless Democrats who strongly support Israel and who care about Israel. And I agree with your plea that from Democrats and from Republicans, we should unite together to support the only democracy in the Middle East, and a democracy which is facing an annihilatory threat from a nation that keeps its word, that really is, according to our State Department, the foremost sponsor of terrorism on earth, a government that slaughters its own people, let alone foreigners. I want to give you a final question. There's a full-page ad from you in today's Washington Post. It's a beautiful ad. And it draws, as you usually do, on biblical imagery. And the ad says that on Wednesday night of this week, this is a little biblical lesson from the Hebrew Bible, which I know you know very well, Senator Cruz, but from the Jewish perspective, that this Wednesday night, we Jews, after this very serious confab in Washington, we're going to have a drink, and we're going to celebrate the rescue and salvation of the Jews from another potential annihilation. in the exact same region in ancient Persia from a pretty bad guy named Haman who wanted to kill all the Jews. Thank you very much. I'm glad you weren't booing me. I wasn't sure for a moment. And there was a queen, very beautiful, Queen Esther, who had a choice, Rabbi Eliezer. And this is how you phrase the ad. She had a choice to either speak out and not just alienate the king, but perhaps alienate him so much that she could lose her life, or to stand up for her people and even suffer self-immolation, total self-destruction. And she hesitated, and she wasn't sure what to do. And I need not tell you that her uncle Mordechai, who's the hero of the story, but the book is not named after him because he's not the one who had to take that courageous step, said to her that if you hesitate and you do not speak out, salvation will come to the Jews from another source. They will not die, they will somehow survive. But you and your family will be lost because you will have lost that moment in history. And she did not hesitate. I ask you simply to comment on that, Rabbi Eliezer, given that you're a man of international reputation. I always say, I believe you're one of the 3 most respected human beings alive, with me and one other. Oh, it's a joke. That was a joke. Maybe the Dalai Lama, the Pope, Elie Wiesel. It's a special pantheon, a special triumvirate. You have put your name and reputation on the line numerous times to stand up for the Jewish people. Bitburg with President Reagan, who was definitely a friend of Israel and the Jewish people, but you still spoke up. President Obama is a close friend to you and a very good friend to you. And we honor the president. And you still have said that the Prime Minister of Israel needs to be heard. Are we in one of those moments where Jews have to speak out regardless of the consequences? Are we in an Esther moment? And does the Prime Minister of Israel face that Esther moment?
We should speak up at any moment. There are no moments just like that, only this moment. We are a people who have always spoken up. What are we for the last 2,000 years? We spoke. And because we spoke, we suffered quite a lot. We endured quite a lot for speaking up. If we had chosen silence, many of the inquisitions would have been closed. Many of the tortures and many of the persecutions would not have taken place. But we spoke. After all, we are not only the people of the book, we are the people of the word. And we spoke. You know, when we study, we don't study just reading. We study a Talmud by speaking, by singing it to this day, by a certain beautiful melody when you study a page of the Gemara. Beautiful. It's melody. Sing it. Shmuley, listen. Everything that I have endured would have allowed me to be pessimistic and choose despair. I had all the good reasons. I had the right to choose despair and say to the world, goodbye world. You didn't want me, you took my parents, you took those that were dear to me. Goodbye, I have nothing to do with you. And I could have chosen all kinds of things. Could have chosen either to give my life to a cause, far away, art, painting, or whatever, go to the desert and dream dreams. I rejected those options. I felt simply that I owe my years, and therefore my thoughts, and my prayers, and my ideas, and my ideals, not only to myself. Who am I really? I owe it to all those whom I will never meet, but one day may read what I have written in my testimonies. And maybe a word here, a phrase there, an image here, a story there, will have an impact. That's why I teach to this day, hoping that in my classes, the student will learn something about Plato or about Isaiah, that whenever that student will have a decision to make later on, as a banker or as a shoemaker, no matter what, make a decision. Whatever he heard in my class will influence him to say yes or no. turn the page or no? We are not here to be alone. God alone is alone. Human beings are not, and therefore not meant to be. We, the Jewish people, have been the loneliest people in the world for 2,000 years. And nevertheless, we had all the time contacts with the outside world. All the time. In Rome and in Paris and in Spain, sometimes they were cruel, other times they were very benevolent, but we had contacts. We are not alone. And therefore, I think we came, at least in my family, my wife and I, came to work for humanity, for those who need us. I cannot allow myself to live in a world where somebody or some group or some community would need me and I would not answer. I cannot say I will succeed in giving what they need, but they can wait for me. But at least to know, and want them to know that I know that I'm ready to do something. I couldn't. It is the loneliness that would actually become a nightmare for me. And that loneliness is my decision. I don't want it. And therefore, my friends and I are involved in communal affairs. And we try to do something, always to do something, with words, with acts, with travels, with going around. Look about, really, I remember when I went for the first time to the Soviet Union. I wasn't married yet. I remember I went there and spent there Simchat Torah. I mean, immediately after the high holidays, Sukkot and Simchat. For the first time, and very few people knew what was going on in Russia then. Was anchored. And I came back then with my testimony called The Jews of Silence, a book about Russian Jews. You know, I have published by now 60 books at least. I've written 100, but 60 have been published. Most of them translated in English by my wife.
Excellent translations each time.
Absolutely. So, but the Jews of Silence is very special. Very special. It's about those Jews in Russia. When I came, nobody knew what was going on there. They were afraid to speak. They were afraid they couldn't travel. Very few people went there. And I came back then with my book called The Jews of Silence. And the conclusion, the whole book was to show, hey, they are not silent. We are, they are not. And I remember the last word, last conclusion of the book is, when I left the whole book, The Jews of Silence, the conclusion was, and now I am not afraid of the silence of the Jews there, but the Jews of silence among whom I live in America. Oh.